back to Classic Comics. So I have another article here talking about the poor sales of comics in 2023. I originally was going to do this as part of the previous video, but this article it's pretty long, and so together it was probably going to be over 20 minutes. So I decided to be better to break them up into two parts. And this is on sketched.com. And of course, as you can see here, it could be better, but it could be worse. Shops discuss the often difficult year so far in comics retail. Coming off a multi year high that began in 2020, things were solid when I checked in with comic shops in January. Sales were steady, manga was popping, and other categories had seen growth. While there were points of consternation, healthy numbers can act as a balm for even the most troubled comic retailer's soul. Ultimately, the good outweighed the bad last year. But it was clear there were storm clouds on the horizon, if not there already. It wasn't because sales were down dramatically or even across the board. It was because everything was harder and more exhausting than it had been before, with several retailers not even understanding how they came out ahead in 2022. While success was there, it often felt tenuous. It's like Bruno Battista of Dublin's Big Bang Comics put it at the time: the uncertainty is bigger than ever for retailers. They were hopeful, of course. Comic retailers are a hardy bunch, passionate individuals eager to do their job and do it well. But doubt was seeping into the picture. Shops were surviving or even thriving in some cases. They just didn't always feel very good about it. If that was the case then the bad vibes have only gotten more pervasive since. Just as before, it isn't because everyone's sales have evaporated. Some shops are level or even up from 2022, albeit fewer than before. It's just a lack of faith in publishing partners, and the material itself is taking hold, particularly when it comes to single issues. That's for good reason. Much of it isn't working. More than that, the job has gotten harder and the margins tighter. That was more palatable during the boom times of 2021. Higher costs are easier to deal with when everything is selling. But as Joe Field of Concord, California's Flying Colors Comics put it, sales shifting back towards pre pandemic levels, but with post pandemic costs, is not a good recipe for success. Now, I'm not gonna read this whole article because it's actually quite long. But if you're interested in this sort of thing, I recommend you giving it a read. But I'm gonna skip down here a bit. Now, first they talk about what was working and what was doing well. And they get mixed responses from talk to about five or six different comic retailers. And one thing they generally agree on, I think, is that this Dawn of DC initiative or event at the beginning of the year was actually working pretty well, and DC was seeing a sales boost because of it. And the good thing is that it wasn't just Batman books. Superman was doing better. Green Lantern was also doing better, as well as some others. But that was about it as far as what was good, what was working. Now we get to down here. How crucial hits you can count on are is exemplified nicely by a pair of answers to the question of what isn't working. One was from Batista, who told me, quote, everything is the succinct answer to this, before adding, I don't remember seeing regular customers so despondent about what they're buying. Mylan clearly wanted to outdistance his peer in brevity, as his opening line to my query was a simple pained, oof, so much. To illustrate that even further, here's Challenger's year by year category per Brower. And this is from Challengers Comics in Chicago, I believe. And so here you see what their sales are year over year in various categories. So back issues up 24%, up quite a bit, up a quarter. DC Comics up 3%. Supplies even, and supplies for comics, I'm assuming means bags and boards and what long boxes, that sort of thing. And then after that, everything down. Graphic novels down 3%. Other publishers are down, and that's not including Marvel, which is down 6%. Other publishers down 5%. T-shirts and pins down 6%. Toys down 27%. Posters and prints down 28%. Gaming, Magic the Gathering, and Pokemon down 36%, or over a third. And I'm assuming D&D and RPGs would fall into that category. Of the 10 categories worth mentioning at the shop, Brower shared that three are even or up, with pack issues rising from a small number as it isn't a point of emphasis for challengers, with everything else down a minimum of 3%. While the bottom three are not comic specific products, it reinforces the everything isn't working nature of the year. New single issue comics are the biggest pain point, though. Batista described their single issue customers as having an energy of, quote, I'll continue to buy them, I guess, unquote. While the other two main verticals at Big Bang, books and action figures, are thriving. Single issue comics inspire a certain ennui amongst customers. The idea that reading single issue comics was a duty for customers as much as anything came up multiple times in my conversations. The one that hit was Dawn of DC, and even it comes with a downside. As enthusiastic as retailers were about that initiative, the fact that all its titles were almost immediately going away for 2 months, so a line wide horror event in Night Terrors can replace them, is enough to drive retailers mad. Batista described it as not just shooting their own foot, but doing it with a bazooka. It could cost the publisher all the gains they made during the beginning of Dawn of DC. If the big two and the top releases are inconsistent at best and maddening at worst, then they're aspirational compared to the rest. Continuing a trend from the past few of these reports, smaller publishers are struggling emphasized, on the single issue side. Where that line begins really depends on the shop. Some said it begins around Dynamite, with that publisher, and below consistently failing to connect with readers. Others noted it should really start at Image. Mylan said each month features one or two new and interesting series from the creator owned publisher and a dozen from lesser known creators in, quote, genres that are already well catered for, unquote. Shops have found it increasingly difficult to get readers excited about much of Image's line. To emphasize how difficult this time is, though, some even insinuated that Marvel is where the trouble begins. Much of its line, particularly its incessant minis with no clear audience, are unmovable, and that's the biggest publisher in the direct market. Either way, many felt there are just too many comics right now. Field said that with 100 plus new titles coming in every week, there's no way his staff of five can recommend that many. And the problem is, if they don't sell immediately, then they're dead when another slate arrives the following week. Combine that with many titles having no clear market and customers lacking the funds to support them, even if there was one, and you have a recipe for disaster, or drastically reduced orders at the very least. Several shops emphasize that there's an increasing number of publishers that simply aren't earning orders anymore, as readership evaporates by the time number two hits the shelf for many titles, if it existed to begin with. That's especially the case with those that are also available on platforms like Whatnot and Substack. Some comic shops emphasize that competition from those spaces makes it even more difficult to move associated titles. And again, this isn't just a problem for the smallest publishers. As Pratt told me, quote, a bunch of titles from Image, Boom, Dark Horse, and lower publishers only sell 1 to 3 copies each issue. The retailer noted that even top names like Scott Snyder and Jeff Lemire exist within that range. This is effectively an everyone problem. Even more damning is this statement from Batista, who said, quote, 70% of the publishers could disappear tomorrow, and 90% of the customers wouldn't even notice, unquote. The veteran retailer admitted that might come across as flippant, but it was important for him to note it's also likely a realistic number. Like Exum told me, this is nothing new, at least to some degree. Smaller publishers have always been tough sells. It's something he's seen for decades, but to some, this feels like a slightly different species of a previous problem. That's the case for rising price points as well. People have been complaining about the cost of comics since they went from 10 cents to 12. Higgins, Anderson, and Exum all noted that if the quality is there, nobody will care. If a reader wants a comic, they're going to get it. That may be true, but the problem is we're in a period when other costs are skyrocketing while household incomes have stagnated. While bigger acclaimed titles might make the cut, others won't, and there are plenty that aren't in the current environment. Multiple shops emphasize that comics are just getting too expensive. Mylan said he's regularly surprised by the totals he ends up with when he rings people up, which King supported by saying that I think people are price blind for individual comics, but not to the final register tally. Batista shared that this was the first year a customer actually wanted to confirm that a comic cost as much as it did, because surely it had to be a mistake. Customers are noticing and reacting, with some even returning books to the shelves or reducing their pull lists as a result. This is also primarily a single issue problem. While Sorelli has concerns about Viz boosting its prices from $9.99 to $11.99, most graphic novels are perceived as carrying enough value to make the purchase worth it. That isn't the case for the comics that cost $4.99 or more. Rising prices cut in two other ways as well. Field has seen customers use $9.99 anniversary issues not as a moment of celebration, but as a jumping off point. He also finds himself ordering fewer copies of the more expensive titles, knowing that customers will bristle at the price. That happened at Big Bang with Ultimate Invasion #1, as they were super conservative when ordering because of its price point, despite its towering pedigree. Several shops believe that Marvel cost itself significant orders and revenue because of the $8.99 cover price. The strange thing about this environment is if it was just rising prices and comics being difficult to sell, retailers would probably be fine with where things are. It's less than ideal, of course, but they're used to that kind of thing. Where the pain really hits is in the process. This is business as usual at this point, but in an era of multiple distributors for single issue comics and everything really, the job of a retailer has gotten more confusing and more difficult, especially with each distributor existing as mini monopolies. That results in longer hours and more frustration with little added value stemming from that. It's the same basic issue that we've been faced with for almost the past 3 years now, Brower said. There's so much extra work for no extra income. In fact, looking at 2023 sales, it's way more work for way less money. Okay, and I'm going to skip ahead again. So they talk here basically about how, because of all the multiple distributors, instead of everyone just using Diamond like they used to, it takes a lot more time and hours you got to put in order to get your orders. Earlier this year, I was talking with a retailer who had a big thought about the state of things. He wondered whether comics retail had died already, effectively, and what we were existing in now was a zombie direct market. It continues to operate simply because it doesn't know how to do anything else. I bring this up because Field said something that reminded me of that. The veteran retailer emphasized that publishers are not producing periodicals in a value driven way, electing to pump out more and more variant covers in the vain hope to find more buyers. Field doesn't see that as a winning formula, at least not for a healthy direct market. Publishers aren't the only somnambulant ones. While some retailers reported enthusiasm amongst their customers, several noted that many are just shuffling along simply because that's what they've always done. It feels like a lot of regular customers are just going through the motions right now, Batista said. Question becomes, is that a new status quo, as Batista wondered, or is it just a blip? It's hard to tell, but it does seem as if it's connected to the material produced. Batista said Big Bang has, quote, never had so many customers canceling books because they're just not enjoying them, unquote. Mylan noted that they see enthusiasm for some things at OK Comics, but long term readers, especially big two ones, appear to be buying out of habit. That's a tough place to be. Retailers are going to need help to get to that next step, and they're going to need it from publishing and distribution partners. Shops' requests from those partners were copious and eminently reasonable. Returnability is a recurring topic. More and better promotion was desired, especially in this fractured era for social media, caring more about sales in shop rather than just orders at final order cutoff. A greater focus on quality of comics, publishing fewer of them, and supporting them when they do hit. More information about releases and giving shops a way to communicate directly with their partners. Fewer variant covers developed in smarter ways. That's just some of what could help shops do their jobs better. But in the most abbreviated way, things need to change. The problem is, if you've read one of these articles before, you'll realize that the list of requests rarely differ in a significant way. That's because they typically go unfulfilled, as Batista noted. At this stage, you can just go back to all our answers from the past years, collate them together, and realize that practically nothing changed. My wish for this year is that the chasm between what publishers put out and what we can actually sell gets smaller, he added. Big publishers seem to take zero input from us here on the front line, and that doesn't really seem likely to change anytime soon. And again, there's more, but it just talks generally about, how difficult it is running a shop. It doesn't really provide a lot of information. So I think you get the picture here. After getting a boost thanks to the pandemic, or more correctly, thanks to all that PP money that the government threw at businesses to help keep them afloat, sales are drying up, particularly on single issue comics, and it doesn't seem likely that the situation will improve anytime soon, if ever. But let me know what you think of this information in the comments. Are comic sales likely to rebound anytime in the near future? And please like this video before you leave. And also sub to the channel and check out some of my other videos. And I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.